Well, welcome back after the Chinese Grand Prix, and not a classic, I would say, but there was a lot going on, and the upshot is McLaren are in the ascendant. There's no question about it. They've won the first two Grand Prix, and interestingly enough, one race winning by Lando Norris, the other won today by Oscar Piastri. And so one set all, so to speak, but an important one. We said at the beginning of the race weekend that this was an important weekend after what happened to Piastri in Australia, and he bounced back well. And funnily enough, everything we talked about in terms of tyres didn't quite come to be, and what we thought would be the obvious two-stop ended up being easily not a problem to do a one-stop. So, plenty to talk about in this next hour. I am joined once again by Chris Medland and, of course, Bob Varsha. Jon's having a weekend off this weekend. Let's, Chris, your thoughts first and foremost, and then Bob.
My thoughts are I hate races like that, where it promises so much, and it's a strategic kind of waiting game. And the reason you're going through the kind of pain of the early stages with everyone settling down and looking after their tyres is because it could become so problematic later on. And normally someone pulls the pin and ups the pace, and it does create those dramas. And it just suddenly, about halfway through, when everyone started talking about maybe the one stop would work, one, it looked fanciful, but two, you thought, oh, well, then they're all going to measure their pace for now as well. No one's going to do anything. And I actually thought Lewis Hamilton was about to save the race. When he came in and made his second stop, it was probably right on the cusp of when you could make it work and it might show up other people. And I thought, well, if they do struggle the top five with their tyres here, we're going to get a great finish. Same with a few other teams that had committed to two stops. You look at the Racing Bulls did the same, but it just never happened. And when it then doesn't happen and the tyre holds on, you kind of play a waiting game and then nothing changes. And it's a shame because that same race could be run tomorrow, the same approach, and the tyres don't hold on with slightly warmer temperatures or somebody pushing that tiny bit more, and you get a classic from it. And sadly, it's kind of one or the other, and we got the wrong one today.
Bob?
Yeah, I have to agree with that. It's an old adage in racing, I think, is nobody talks about tires until they fail. And this was a case, as Chris just outlined, where Pirelli's tire was, just a superb piece of engineering that lasted longer than anybody thought it would. Everybody adjusted to it, but between trying to find clean air and so on and so on and so on, it led to a fairly processional event, I must say, although there were a few good battles, some passing down in, I guess it was turn 13. I'm a little gobsmacked as to how Lando Norris got to the end with failing brakes. I mean, that was a bit of excitement right at the end.
And it was nip and tuck. You tell how much he was cruising. He was was losing 3 or 4 seconds, and you saw it. He was actually, literally not, going into corners at the same speed as he was before, so to avoid braking.
And especially after we lost Fernando Alonso early on with brake issues, I thought, well, that's weird. 2 teams having brakes.
It's interesting. Very interesting. Highlight for the Americans, Haas scoring 2. 2 scorers. And that is really impressive. Ocon we hardly saw, but that was a really impressive run from a team that were nowhere a week ago, both in the points today. That is pretty darn impressive.
Yeah, and following up one of Chris's statistical nuances going into the weekend was that now 9 of the 10 teams have scored points just 2 weekends into the season, which is pretty spectacular compared to last year.
Yeah, very much so. Chris, why don't you think Hamilton could be on the same pace as Leclerc with a wounded car?
I think it's down to balance. I think we've seen with Ferrari that they haven't quite got that car working all the time. And they had it in a better window for the sprint, but they did make changes to that car because sprint conditions are on a third of race fuel, and it was fairly sunny, it was fairly warm, but it was meant to be warmer today, and they were trying to also learn what would get them the best qualifying performance. So you still make tweaks as the track evolves and you get more rubber down. It was a high grip surface, so you don't stick with the exact same car that you had when it was good in the sprint just because it was good then. You need to follow the direction of the rest of the race weekend. And I just don't think they got that right, because if anything, it suggests Leclerc's balance was better, or helped at least, by the damage that he picked up. And it was the left-hand side, and it was the front left tyre that everyone was most worried about, because turn 1 is that long right-hand corner, so the front left is loaded up heavily on the outside of the car. The same with turn 13 onto the back straight. Then even the hairpin at turn 14 is a tight right-hander, so again, that front left takes a battering. And yeah, you want your downforce, you'd think, but it suggests that they just didn't quite have the balance right. And Hamilton himself, it sounded like, admitted that quite early in the race, that I'm not just biding my time here, I'm actually struggling. That was, again, maybe a disappointing aspect of the race, in the sense of I had high hopes for both the Ferraris and for Max Verstappen. And in the early phase, you thought, okay, Hamilton is holding back a bit. He's looking to really make a different tyre strategy work, or come on stronger later on. Verstappen the same, the way he really dropped back in 6th. And he hadn't been overly punchy when he'd run a bit wide at turn 1. So I thought, okay, he's got a game plan in mind here. And in the end, it just showed that neither of them actually had that much pace. And it was well covered off by the McLarens. We're talking about fairly small margins here. This wasn't a race where someone won by half a minute or anything like that. But it just wasn't quite enough when you had the 2 fastest cars running 1-2 from the end of the first lap to really create any drama and excitement. And the slightly slower cars were all trying to do something different and couldn't. So that was disappointing. But I still think, signs of recovery from Ferrari, something better this weekend than what we saw in Melbourne. And don't forget, that was back-to-back races. So they've now got a week to get back to the factory, do a bit more analysis, do some work on the simulator. All the teams this is, but certainly Ferrari are one that I would say are looking for more answers, and maybe Red Bull, and then maybe come on stronger in Suzuka in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, and can we glean anything from the way Verstappen on a heavy fuel load seemed to be nowhere, 6 seconds off at one point, and then slowly started clawing it back as the race came to him, as it were, towards the end? Is that just that the car is better on a lighter fuel load, or is that too simplistic?
It's potentially too simplistic, in the sense that you've also got to think there was a different tyre compound being used. You were on the hard tyre for the second stint. You were on the medium for the first stint. So maybe when there was a bit more grip to be taken from the tyre itself, but then you want to keep it in a certain window, that might have been harder. It might suggest that the Red Bull is actually harder on its tyres, and Verstappen did go easy, trying to look after that medium tyre. Don't forget, he faded quite a lot in the sprint itself as well.
Okay.
So then going on to the more robust tyre, then being harder on it as the temperature dropped as well. It clouded over, track temperature got lower, but you need to put a bit more energy into the hard tyre to get that working. That might have just suited the Red Bull a little bit more. And the fact that, again, he probably took it easy for the first half of that stint, trying to look after that tyre. Once he felt like, okay, I'm getting to the end on this, I've protected it enough, then he could unleash a bit more of the pace he had. And those are the small margins that exist between all the teams and all the cars, which is what's exciting about this year. It didn't make for a great race today, but I think it will on multiple occasions later in the season. That those tiny details, you get it right or wrong, as a driver with your finesse as well, it really can have a major, major impact. And it opens up some pretty surprising results. I think you mentioned Haas, same thing. Like the way that they executed their strategy. That's a car that I never would have had down for finishing 7th today in a race that didn't have huge drama. They beat Kimi Antonelli on pure pace, a strategy and pace. They just outfoxed. There was no safety cars, no interruptions. Only, I think, 2 cars got lapped, the 2 Saubers. So it actually shows that it feels pretty close, and those small details are what will make the difference between what looks like a really good result and what looks like a terrible one.
Yeah, no question.
And in the backdrop to all of this, remember that nobody had any time on the hard tire. Everybody had 2 sets, and they kept, with the exception of, I think Aston Martin maybe ran the hard tire on Friday, but nobody else did. And they didn't know how the tire was going to work until they got on it in anger.
Yeah, no question. I'm starting to really love Ollie Behrman. What a character. I love his chows every time he did an overtake. His dad was loving that. But he's a character, isn't he? He's got a nonchalance that belies his rookie status in my mind. I like his style. I think he knows he belongs, and I think he's quite comfy in his seat.
Of course, he looks like he's 12 years old, but aside from that.
I mean, a lot of the drivers look about that age, don't they? At the moment. I mean, mentioning
every
Antonelli,
year.
I've just said about the Haas beating them on pace. I've seen an update from Mercedes that say they think Antonelli picked up floor damage on lap one. So that compromised his race and he lost pace. I'm trying to remember exactly when that happened, but I think I do remember hearing in commentary someone mentioning somebody running a bit wide and could damage the floor. So how that happened, I'm not certain, but that maybe compromised the Mercedes. But yeah, the Haas had pace in, and that was two different strategies, wasn't it? Two opposite ways of running the race, but committed to the one stop, I think, with both cars early. And Behrman was very good in the sense that he had to make some moves on a medium tyre that is going to be more fragile than the hard. And I think he was patient at the right times, he was aggressive at the right times, and he didn't take too much out of it. And once he moved into what was 10th, he got ahead of Pierre Gasly, didn't he? And I thought, okay, he's closing in on Alex Albon, but you've got Lance Stroll, who pitted much later than Behrman onto a set of mediums as well, trying to come through. You had the Racing Bulls who went for the two-stop, who could be quick. And I thought, will Behrman have taken too much out of his tyres here? But none of it. He really judged it well, and his pace was really good to the end. He couldn't get to Albon, but Albon similarly had pulled off a nice one-stop strategy where you could see for Williams and Haas, they were going for a one-stop from the very start of the race compared to the leaders kind of switching to it midway through. So it was a really good performance from Behrman. And I think, to be honest, like we've got to be careful not to overlook Esteban Ocon getting 7th. That's a fantastic result in that car. After the weekend they had in Melbourne. But Behrman had such a bad weekend in Melbourne himself. To bounce back in this way will do his confidence the world of good if it needed it. Because as Bob says, he's a pretty confident guy.
Yeah, no question. Guys, we're going to take a break in a minute, but I've got a question for both of you. The guy that was so good at the tests in Bahrain has disappeared, and I'm talking about Carlos Sainz. What do you think?
Well, he says the car doesn't have a balance that suits him. I don't know how that differs from the run plan they ran in Bahrain during testing. But it's a bit of a mystery that suddenly he should seem so at sea in a car that looked so formidable in preseason testing. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, if his seat was a big problem in the sprint race, that certainly doesn't help. But it's another case of two different drivers in the same car. I mean, obviously, Alex Albon likes the car just fine based on his results, whereas suddenly Sainz is having so many problems. It's a bit like a page out of the Verstappen-Lawson book.
Yeah, Chris Albon saying he loved his tires were fine. They came on the radio and and he was like, "Leave me alone, I got this."
Yeah, I think you've got to remember also though where they each qualified, and qualifying was actually, to me, the big disappointment for Sainz.
Right.
Whether the seat played a big role, whether the balance hurt so much as well. Again, going back to the small margins, it is so close. I think there was just over a tenth of a second, or maybe just under a tenth, from 9th to 13th at the end of Q2. So you could end up, 5 places back for the tiniest detail and not able to advance. So the fact that Albon started in the top 10, went with his clear strategy, Sainz was caught in traffic. The gap between the two of them at the end of that race was 20 seconds. But obviously a number of positions as well. There was 3 cars in between them. And I feel like Sainz maybe will have actually taken a lot from this race. Experience, like learning of how the car works, how the team works in a race situation. He obviously didn't get that in Melbourne. And that was the big thing that his management said upset them in Australia. It wasn't the mistake he made, as much as that was frustrating, but it wasn't also the chance of missing out on points in a chaotic race with Albon going and finishing 5th. It was more, could have finished 15th in that race, but would have had a race distance under our belt for experience, as Bob said on his grid rundown. And I think rightly, if you don't put it in the wall, then you're going to get that experience. And I think now he's at least going to have picked up a lot from this. Sainz is a very methodical, very smart, hard-working driver. He's someone who, I think it's fair to say he's extremely talented, but maybe has been against teammates that have, if you want to use the term natural talent, have a tiny bit more. Maybe that little bit of spark of raw pace. If you look at a Max Verstappen, if you look at a Charles Leclerc, who he's been alongside at different times. And he's given them a run for their money because of the other facets of his kind of driver profile. So I expect Sainz to be strong in Japan, just from learning from today, going and digging into what he's learnt from it over the next 10 days and getting to Suzuka and putting that into practice. Now, it might not bridge the gap to Albon. And similarly, let's give Albon his dues. He started the season on fire, basically, really, really impressively.
Yeah.
And he's been very collaborative with Sainz, very open and helpful. And I just think it's boosting Albon's profile as well, or his reputation. And I don't think it's hurting Sainz too much yet. For the new drivers, or for some of them at least, I think you've got to give them until the European season and into a couple of races in Europe before you really start to think, okay, there's still a gap here. But these first couple of rounds, certainly back to back, and when you've missed out in Melbourne, it's going to be tough to really hit the ground running.
No question about it. Look, we're going to take a short break. We'll come back. There's plenty more to talk about here. You're listening to Speed City. We are having a washdown of the Chinese Grand Prix, which has just finished, and it was a 1-2 for McLaren. Join us after this. Well, we've got ALX. Made me wonder that what someone could have done on hards yesterday would have lost pace initially, but once mediums hit the cliff, could have recouped some relative pace. Yeah, not enough drop-off in the tyres to make it exciting. Yeah, that's our good man from Thailand chiming in there. Being a Lando fan is stressful. Oscar did a great drive from the front, but Lando did bring home an important number 2. He did. And I think that was the real worry for McLaren during that, was that they wouldn't actually get the 18 points if that break had failed. And it was getting close, wasn't it? There was no question about it. It's a good job there wasn't another 3 or 4 laps. You got any questions for Chris or Bob? Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, based on what Lando said about the pedal going to the floor, yeah, that made things pretty dicey on that last lap.
Yeah, no question about it.
I think Lando, based on what I saw on the TV broadcast, I think Lando had the prettier fans in the grandstand than perhaps Oscar did.
Yeah, but Oscar is part Chinese, so they will have taken him under their wing. That is. Great grandfather.
How about that crowd?
Yeah. I thought it was ironic because we spent
250,000 people in the grandstands.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. Especially, it reminded me with Ho Ping Tung. I was living out in Asia when Ho was coming through, and we used to debate whether he was really Dutch or really Chinese. Same with Alex Young, Chinese, obviously heritage, but Malaysian. Right. And everybody wanted a Chinese driver. And I just thought it was ironic that was the question that Ho threw to him was, but you're part Chinese. Well, listen, we're coming back from the break. And, I want to talk about radios next.
I'm George Russell, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
Now, even if you think it's a bit overhyped, AI is suddenly everywhere, from self-driving cars to molecular medicine to business efficiency. It's not just your industry yet. It's coming, and it's coming fast. But AI needs a lot of speed and computing power. So how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? Time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. Now, OCI is a blazing fast and secure platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, plus all your AI and machine learning workloads. OCI costs 50% less for compute and 80% less for networking, so you're saving a pile of money. Thousands of businesses have already upgraded to OCI, including Vodafone, Thomson, Reuters, and Suno AI. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. For new US customers with minimum financial commitment, offers end March 31st. So see if your company qualifies for this special offer at oracle.com/formula. That's oracle.com/formula. Welcome back. We are taking a look at what just happened in the Chinese Grand Prix. What I can tell you is McLaren are making a definitely strong charge now. A long way to go yet, but it's a great start. You can't beat the fact that they've won both races so far, and today a 1-2, and it would have been that way in Australia had Oscar not succumbed to the conditions. But guys, feisty stuff on the radio today. Nope, says Charles Leclerc when they asked a question, would you like to do this? Hamilton, similar. I mean, there was some feisty stuff going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know that Lewis was upset with the way that feisty stuff in Melbourne was portrayed in the media.
Yeah.
We talked about it then. It's human beings in a pressurized environment.
Yeah.
You have very little time. You want to be as clear and concise as you can. And of course, as background to all this, there's somebody in a room somewhere at the racetrack who is chopping up all these radio messages and inserting them into the broadcast. So who knows what, the entirety of what was said. But it's a job. It's work. You've got to deal with it,
I do think it's something. I mean, there was talk a season ago or so about dropping radio with the worry of swearing and all the rest of it. And obviously, Mohammed bin Suleiman has been very vociferous about fining folks if they do swear, and so that brought it up again. But I think it's a huge part now of the modern day coverage, and without it, it wouldn't be half as colourful. Would you guys agree?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sure what most fans, particularly fans new to the sport, are thinking when they hear these drivers speaking in a normal tone of voice while they're, going 200 miles an hour in hot weather and
Piastri
muffled in their balaclavas. And I mean, they're pretty much, the sun is shining, the birds are singing. We'll go with plan B.
Yeah, the two standouts to me on that are George Russell and Oscar Piastri. It is literally as though they're on the pit wall, Chris. Piastri going, well, yeah, we could do that, and da-da-da. And same with George Russell. I mean, amazingly steady to be doing 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, it shows you exactly where who's having like a solid race or a comfortable race and who's not. I thought, to be fair to Lewis, I know, like you said, we've covered it, but I thought in Melbourne he was remarkably polite with the way he was replying to his race engineer. And even though it was, not happy with what he was getting or getting too much information, he was always very polite with his responses and saying please and saying it calmly. And I think generally it was the same today, even when he was trying to push back on when he was going to let Leclerc past him.
Yeah, did you read anything into that?
Is one who No, I think that was genuinely, if I read the situation right, we never heard the initial message from Hamilton. Okay. But if he suggested that if you need to let Leclerc, you can go past me because I'm struggling here, we might need to try something different. Then he then feels like, well, I'm the one who's saying I'm willing to give the place up, but I'm the one who'll choose when I do it, where I do it. I'm the good guy here. So he was a bit more forceful with the orders that were coming about when to switch positions. But I think also he did time it better. Like if you look at turn one, the way two cars can go through there, and when he let Leclerc through, that was probably more sensible than really backing off into the hairpin and costing himself a whole second of lap time. So that was just down to driver feel, and you can't have long discussions on the radio. You don't have long enough to have a proper chat. So you keep everything succinct. But I did think Leclerc was the one who was more punchy. I quite like his sarcasm sometimes on the radio. We didn't hear much from Max Verstappen, and I think that shows that a lot of it was coming to him from GP, but not Max going the other way. I think that shows the driver resigned to the pace he had and just kind of getting on with it. But he's aware of it. He's not complaining that the team's done anything wrong. He just knows they're the limitations of his car. The same though, the biggest chatter came from Norris and the two Ferraris, because I think both were expecting a little bit more, but felt there was a bit more on the table, and they're trying to find a way of getting that out of the race. Whereas Russell and Piastri themselves were more comfortable and just executing solidly, and they knew that they shouldn't overstretch themselves, which is something that Russell said, didn't he? Pre-race, he said, we shouldn't throw away a podium chasing a win. And I think that was pretty accurate today. But that said, when he was chasing down Norris on the final lap or two, that would have been a huge blow to Norris if he'd have lost second.
Oh,
because he was the one who kept pushing on despite team radio messages to back off. to look after his brake pedal. And if he had then have had to cruise home so slowly that Russell nicked it from him, that would have been a huge error, actually. So, yeah, would have been. It wasn't in the end. He got across the line in second, but it did get pretty tight. 1.3 seconds was far, far closer than maybe it should have been.
Just looking at the driver standings, Lando Norris now leads with 44 points to Max Verstappen, who's quietly going about his business, second in the championship. Like you say, didn't say much today, but he's on 36 points. One behind is George Russell on 35, and one behind him is Oscar Piastri on 34. So Japan will be interesting just for that fact, because it's a long drop-off to 18 points for Kimi Antonelli and Charles Leclerc, who are 5th and 6th at the moment. So we've already got a four-way battle at the front, and it's just a couple of points between them, which could change dramatically in 2 weeks' time. So it's starting to shape up nicely. We've obviously got the midfield battle. I think it's going to be interesting between the RBs and Williams and potentially Alpine. So yeah, we're starting to get a little bit of a picture here, but there's a long way to go. And as you rightly pointed out, Chris, it's back to the simulators now for the next week or so to find some solutions to whatever the problems that they may or may not have incurred in these first two rounds, which were so different.
Oh, absolutely. Like the two different sets of conditions as well in terms of the weather that they got in Melbourne. And it has shown that the McLaren, when they find it in a decent window, is going to be quickest in most conditions. But as you say, like Max just being 8 points behind Lando at this point, having finished second to him in Melbourne, should have been third probably, but obviously Piastri having his issue. And then Russell's consistency, both being the ones that are going to be the lead scorers, it looks like, for their teams, is going to keep them in there. But also, these gaps are small in the sense that, say you get a win for Verstappen in Suzuka and it's Piastri who's second and Norris is third, which is completely, reasonable based on the pace that Piastri showed here. Okay, what's maybe not reasonable is the Red Bull being that quick by then, but that's a 10-point swing there between Verstappen and Norris straight away. So it is going to be crucial, these third and fourth places that Russell and Verstappen are picking up, I think, at this early stage of the season. And you've already seen that by not having that in the first two races for the Ferrari drivers, it's cut them quite a chunk of drift already. Obviously, 2 races out of 24. We're not ruling anyone out of the championship here, but it just shows how important it's going to be, because we've seen exactly what we predicted, which is Piastri and Norris taking points off each other and fighting each other, which is great. But it will keep that door from being locked, I think, on other challenges.
Yeah, it's certainly going to keep Russell and Verstappen in the game if they don't have as competitive a car, which it seems at the moment, Bob.
No, absolutely. And it brings to mind something we've talked about on Sunday nights in the past, which is the impact of some team or driver running away with the championship early in the season, as opposed to a nice congested, dramatic point for point battle, because the teams have to decide what they want to spend their resources on getting ready for 2026. And so if say McLaren runs off into the distance slowly but surely, other teams are going to be thinking, well, okay, we got what we got, let's put resource into the 2026 car. Well, I don't know if that's going to change if the idea, and you probably saw the same notes I did, that the FIA is now considering V10 engines.
I know,
on sustainable fuels, bringing those back. Obviously, they've committed to this hybrid formula, and they have to stay in it for at least a few years in cooperation with the manufacturers and what have you. But we may have that on the horizon, which will be another round of huge expenditures and so on. But for right now, teams have hard decisions to make about how effective they are, how effective they think they will be under this year's cost cap, which is $140.4 million or something, and decide when they want to start spreading the wealth around to get ready for next year and its radically new car.
Yeah, good point. And I want to talk some more about that V10s, but we thought I'd take another break. When we come back, I want to talk about a story that's just come up on motorsport.com. Red Bull may swap Lawson and Tsunoda for next race. Join us after this. So, Andy P says Max certainly is not going anywhere. Very impressed with what he's doing in a car that isn't a front runner. And I think all of us would agree now that the penny has dropped. You know, we gave Perez a hard time, but there's something definitely not 100%. Actually, Lawson did okay today, but he still didn't, find the wherewithal to get the tires right and so on and so forth. And also Andy P says, if the V10 thing happens, would 26 engines formula be the shortest in F1 history? Good point. Yeah.
I'd be surprised if that happens. It seemed an odd thing for Ben Sulayem to say, because it would be cool. But yeah, right at the point where you've got manufacturers committing to these new engines and spending a lot of money on them, you want to be keeping them happy. You've got Cadillac coming in, GM saying they're going to build their own power unit, looking to do it for, originally it was 2028. Now it looks like it might be as late as 2030. But then either it's a play to say, well, they'd rather actually we would go to a V10, and that's why he's saying it. Or you're then going to upset a new manufacturer coming in that's just investing on all this infrastructure to build this sort of engine. So I think it was a bit odd. I think it might have been meant as leverage to kind of see who's on side. For that sort of change, to then try and get the FIA a little bit more out of the new Concord agreement, which is being debated at the moment. And all of the teams on the commercial side signed up last weekend in Melbourne. So the FIA don't have any leverage right now because all the teams are aligned with Formula One on what they want the future of the sport to be. So yeah, I did find that a bit odd. I don't think it's a silly concept to be considering in future, or maybe V8s, whichever way you want to go with it. But I think at this point, it's an odd discussion to be having before you've even brought in the next set of regulations.
All right, we're
which
coming
is
back from
the way
break.
the team principals described it.
Yeah,
that ship has sailed.
Hi, this is Gene Haas, and this is Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
And congratulations to Gene Haas and his merry team, led by Io and the rest of the boys. Double points today after I don't think anybody could have predicted that one. We're looking at the Chinese Grand Prix, which has just wrapped up, the second race of the year. And just before the break, I mentioned a story on motorsport.com about the potential of a swap between Tsunoda and Lawson even before the Japanese Grand Prix, which I don't think is going to happen, especially as that's a track that Lawson knows well, and I think he'll be given a chance to do that. Having said that, it was quoted in this article. We played what Lawson said after qualifying, and he reiterated it in an interview with Sky Sports where he said, when asked if he needed to improve, he said, it's just time. Unfortunately, I don't really have time. And when motorsport.com put that to Helmut Marko, he said, he is right. Chris, you know this story probably better than anybody else, and you certainly know Helmut Marko and the way he talks and goes about managing his drivers. What's your take on where we stand now?
I'd be worried if I was Lawson, just the fact that this hasn't been shot down. I think that suggests that Marko has said it's a real possibility that they will review it, and if it's deemed too bad right now, that they will give Yuki his shot. I think it would also be a complete admission, not that they'll say the words, from Red Bull that they got it wrong over the winter. Yeah. That Lawson has not become a bad driver over the off season,
no,
but that they should have put the more experienced Tsunoda in to find out if he can do it. Because now they're thinking, wow, Liam's so far off. Is this Liam? Is this the car? How else are we going to find out? Well, then you go with the guy that actually was performing more consistently over the last few years and has built up the experience to give it a shot within that Red Bull family. So it was tough even today for Lawson. He was over a minute behind Max at the end of the race. Obviously, he started from the pit lane, so it's only going to kind of extrapolate the positions. But he didn't manage to do anything today that made you go, okay, there's the signs of life we're looking for.
Yeah.
But I'm with you as well. I think he deserves to be racing on tracks that are ones that he's comfortable with and that he knows. And I'd give him the next triple header. And then I'd be looking at, okay, because, of course, he tested in Bahrain. And that's a track then he'll know better. You've mentioned what he's done in Suzuka before. Jeddah, I don't believe he's driven on. He might have in Formula 2, though. Yeah, that would give him just an opportunity to show progress. But my fear here is if you make that change, good for Tsunoda because he finally gets his chance of showing what he's capable of. And if he's not capable of anything, then you find out. But I think with every driver that fails alongside Max Verstappen, you also find out the weaknesses of the Red Bull and just how good Max is. But that Red Bull need to be creating a better car, and actually the team are underperforming if it keeps being the second driver that's failing. So there's legs there. I've sent a message or two, but I imagine I won't get a written reply from anyone to confirm or deny that it will be discussed. But I personally think it would be grossly unfair on Lawson to pull the trigger that quickly, given the conditions in Melbourne, the way that weekend unraveled quickly, but also then back-to-back races, new circuit from again. There's giving someone a little bit of time. He says he doesn't have time, but surely you give them more than 10 days.
Yeah, and I'm just going to use an analogy here, Bob, but if it were a head coach in the NFL or if it were a manager in the Premier League, a little bit, when Liverpool aren't winning, it's the manager's fault. So, I just feel that, to a certain extent, does Helmut Marko not have something to pay for this? I.e., shouldn't he also be he's the guy picking these drivers? Does anybody ever say, "Hey, Helmut, do you really know what you're doing?"
Well, yeah. I mean, the adage in U.S. pro sports is you can't fire the team, so you fire the manager. Helmut Marko is basically an independent contractor under contract to Red Bull. He's not really a member of the team as such. But you're right. He does bear a tremendous responsibility and hopefully accountability for the drivers he chooses and which ones they put in the car. Chris has spoken eloquently on the fact that Liam Lawson really hasn't gotten a fair shake yet. Hopefully he will. But if he doesn't, that would be really bad. Maybe what they ought to do is do the full swap, put Yuki and Isaac in the Red Bulls and put Max and Liam in the Racing Bulls, because those cars seem to be operating pretty well.
Well,
consistently, pretty close to each other.
Yeah, okay, but on a more serious note then, let's just say they are serious and they do want to give Yuki a go. Do you then drop Lawson or do you give him the RB seat back?
You give him the RB seat back. I think you have to.
Absolutely.
You could put Iwasa in there, who is the reserve, but I don't think you can write Lawson off at this stage from everything he'd shown in the Racing Bulls car in the past. And the one they're really excited about is Arvid Lindblad, and he's not yet got a super license. He has the ability to have one, but he's still 17, and he'd need an exemption. So they've requested one, as far as I'm aware. It would make him an option later in the year, but I don't think he's quite there yet. And same again, that would just be too soon. He's just starting on his rookie F2 season. Give him time to develop. You're getting excited about his potential, but let these drivers make their mistakes and then and learn from them and improve. And right now, they're not even getting to do that in junior formula, some of them. And then once they are thrust into a really high pressure situation and making mistakes or not performing, they're binned off rather than given the time to prove their potential. So it frustrates me that we're in this situation so early on. But another thing to be said actually about Liam in the Red Bull is we spoke about it before the previous break. Carlos Sainz in the Williams underwhelmed so far in 2 race weekends when we were expecting a lot more from him, and not matched up to Alex Albon. With the greatest respect to Alex Albon, who I do rate highly, he's not Max Verstappen. So that gap would, you'd assume, be bigger if it's Max Verstappen in the Williams. So Liam is struggling, but he's not the only driver struggling. And I think we're going to see more from him if he's given the opportunity. But as I go all the way back that I still feel like it shouldn't have been put. Liam shouldn't have been put in this situation in the first place. He should have been given a bit more responsibility at Racing Bulls, and it should have been on Yuki under pressure to deliver at Red Bull at this stage of the year.
Fair enough. I think that's a good point. Guys, was it only me that noticed, or was there a bit of a homage, as it were, by Piastri saying the car was very lovely? Did you
I
notice
wondered
that?
about that as soon as the words were out of his mouth. I thought, what are you doing?
Yeah, I think that was
of course,
a sort of...
That's Max Verstappen's tagline.
I think it was a sort of, hey, guys, that's our turn now to use that phrase for the rest of the season.
If so, it's pretty clever, I have to say.
Yeah, it was quite funny. And the other quote I liked was in the post-race interview, where the first question was, "Is this the start of your title campaign?" And Piastri said, "I hope so."
It's got to be, hasn't it?
Yeah,
has to be. If you look at the standings already, that's just catapulted him straight back in there, put him fourth, 10 points behind Lando. Again, as we're talking about how quickly it can turn around, but that's a 7-point swing today, just from a 1-2, and that's with Norris getting the best result he could behind Piastri. So, that's put him straight back in the frame. And he was, like we said pre-race, it wasn't that you're out of the frame by being 23 points behind after one race, but if you get a couple of those in a row, or that gap gets a chunk bigger, say it was still standing at that, or Lando had outscored him and he's over 25 points behind, and then he could have one good weekend and one bad weekend, and suddenly that gap's still there, and you're nearly a quarter of the way through the season. It can snowball very quickly. This season will be relentless. We've just had a double header. We're talking about a week off, like a week off is some luxury. I heard the 5 Live commentary team talking about it. One, the teams won't be taking it easy. They will be flat out. 2, though, it's not a week off by any stretch. They're still in China right now doing their pack down, so they've got to travel back to their bases. But it's currently, I'm in the UK Sunday. Monday next week, you fly to Japan to start a triple header. So you've got a full week between now and departing for the next race. But, you've got freight to move and all things like that. This is going to be relentless. We're going to have had 5 races in 6 weeks to kick off the season. So momentum in either direction could be built up pretty quickly. And Piastri just laying down that marker of going, I was right there in Melbourne and I made one mistake and it cost me dearly. But here's my response, I think was really important. And I retain a question mark over Oscar in the sense that everyone's expecting so much of him this year. It's only his 3rd season in Formula One. He's been thrust into front-running car straight away, and that's great to have. But again, another young driver learning his trade still. And if you still look at the way that Norris isn't the finished article, Piastri is improving quickly, but everyone expects him to make huge steps year on year because that's what he's done so far in his career. At some stage, you think there's going to be diminishing returns and the steps are going to be smaller because he's got so good. But so far, he's probably proving me wrong in that those first 2 race weekends, that spin in Melbourne or going off was the same as Norris, and he just had rougher luck in getting stuck on the grass. Lando managed to collect it slightly earlier and stay on track. That could easily have just been a 2nd place there and a dominant win here, and he'd be leading the championship. But he's showing all the right signs that he's made another good step, and he's in a car that's going to let him fight for a championship. So I think that was a big statement from Oscar this weekend.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, listen, guys, let's take our last break of the hour, and we'll come back and we'll wrap up what's going on in the constructors and any last thoughts you've got pertaining to the Chinese Grand Prix Round 2. Yeah. Alex says only one team yet to score points this year. Who would have guessed it would be Alpine? Good point. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it looked very good in testing, the Alpine.
Yeah.
It's strange how it fluctuates so quickly. I guess it is a sign of how competitive it is that you just get something slightly wrong in your setup, or the car's not in the right window, or your strategy's wrong, and you are at the back. You're not just losing 2 positions to one other team. You're losing to 4 teams. So it's great in that sense.
Yeah, no question. I'm trying to think of what else stands out from, what other takeaways, if you will, from this weekend. Not just, it was a busy weekend. I did have a problem. I didn't say it in the pre-show, but I really didn't think it was a good idea, organizational-wise, to have a sprint race as a 2nd race with 6 rookies coming in. It really wasn't an easy weekend when you're still trying to learn a new car and you're still trying to learn, then the resurfacing. flexi wings and freight being late and all the rest of it. You know, I don't know. Full stop. I don't like the sprints anyway. But I would sort of measure if you're going to do 6, do one like May. You know, do one when everybody's settled in.
It used to be, didn't it? I think it was. Do we have Miami as the opener?
Yeah,
sometimes?
yeah.
And you got to have a promoter who's willing to host one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they all want one though. They make more money out of them.
They do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We could talk about that and the impact it's had. I'm kind of happy to talk up just the competitiveness of the season though. In many ways, that it was a boring race, but I'm just looking at we're talking about points. Every team that scored points have done it with a top 7 finish as well.
Hi, this is Max Verstappen, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
Oracle Cloud Infrastructure can help you cut your cloud bill in half if you act by May 31st. See if you qualify for half off at oracle.com/formula. That's oracle.com/formula. Welcome back to Speed City. Chris Medland and Bob Varsha giving their opinions on what was the second race. Not a classic, as we've all said. But let's just quickly run through the Constructors' Championship, which is it's early on. But Mercedes out front. McLaren Mercedes, but Mercedes out front because they're first and second engine-wise, with McLaren now on 78 points and Mercedes themselves on 53. Then Red Bull on 36, just one ahead of Ferrari on 35. And then the gap drops off dramatically to Williams Mercedes in 5th position with 12 points. So again, the top 4 very much starting to make an inroad into this championship. And I don't know, guys, would you say that this is a pattern that's starting to... I mean, is this the obvious pattern, or could anybody get into that top 4?
Well, I'd have to say it's going to be tough. Going off of what I said earlier about teams having to decide when they're going to stop trying to develop this car and start working on 2026, if they're not already. I wonder how long it's going to be before this season turns into a battle between the top 4 teams. And because those further down the table may decide not to try to develop this year's cars, then suddenly that gap is really going to balloon. It doesn't mean the races will be any less entertaining, but I think it's going to come down to the top 4 teams duking it out.
Yeah, that is a good point, Chris. What's your guesstimate as to when teams will say, okay, enough's enough, we need to focus on 26 because it's a big change?
Weirdly, I think a lot of them already have, in a sense. They'll be allocating quite a chunk of their resource onto the 26 car from the word go, 1st of January. And it's how much they just want to leave in terms of development through the year on this year's car. And they will have waited to see how it started. But so far, the way it started actually suggests they need to keep doing it because there's no clear picture about who's going to finish 5th out of the whole bottom 6 teams. I mean, Alpine, yes, yet to score, but finished 11th in both Grand Prix with Gasly. So just outside the points on both occasions. And that car looked decent in testing and has had spells of looking quite good. They just haven't really had a clean weekend yet. So I certainly expect Alpine to score plenty of points. Maybe Sauber, idea marked as going to be comfortably 10th at the start of the year. And that hasn't happened so far with a really good result for Hulkenberg in Melbourne. But also, they've always got a car through to Q2 so far. So there's a competitive enough car in there. But with the Audi project coming online, with the focus on the future at that team, I think that will be the first team to really write off this year completely. But even so, everyone else, including Sauber actually, with that 7th in Melbourne, every time that a team has scored points so far, it's with a top 7 finish. So the Racing Bulls got that with a 6th place for Yuki yesterday in the sprint. But Haas today, 7th and 10th with Ocon and Behrman, 7th for Hulkenberg in Melbourne. It was 6th for Stroll in Melbourne for Aston Martin. And then Albon's had a 5th in Melbourne and 9th today. So all of those teams have had big scoring results. And I think that just means that they're looking at, well, if we turn the taps off now, we could finish 9th or 10th in the championship. If we just push on a little bit more, we could finish 5th. That's $40 million between those positions, maybe more, from 5th to 10th. So I think it makes it hard for those teams to switch off, even though, as Bob rightly says, can't see them getting anywhere near the top 4. Maybe the odd race, there might be circuit characteristics that suit. But aside from that, not consistently. So they are limited to fighting for 5th. But it's the fact that they all, except maybe Sauber in my head, all can realistically look at it.
Yeah, it's a good point. What about the races ahead? Obviously, Japan is a well-known track to all of us. It's been on the calendar for a long time. The early time of effectively April, there's always a chance of weather. But of the races coming up, and they are going to be, by the end of April, we're going to have a much different picture because we've got back to back, as it were. We're pretty packed out in April. So by the time we get to Miami, we should have a pretty good idea of what's happening. Again, Chris or Bob, what are your thoughts on who will look good in the tracks that we're about to face in the month of April?
Wow. Good question.
Go on, Chris.
Dance with the girl who brought you. I think McLaren will continue to look good. It seems to me that it's really not about straightaway speed in Formula One anymore. It's all about corners, how you enter them, mid corner, how you exit them. I saw one of those really cool overlay videos of Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen's laps, just to underline how tight the field is. And it was interesting that the Ferrari would pull ahead on the straightaways and Max would kill him in the corners. So who are the cars that do that? We don't have enough data, I don't think, yet to know who is going to hit those huge sweeps at Suzuka and Bahrain, wide open nighttime race. Same for Saudi Arabia. So we may see cool temperatures and on and on and on, and all the myriad of things that go into making a car perform and then planning and executing a race run.
It's quite interesting, actually, that Suzuka especially, because Verstappen's been very, very strong there the last few years. The Red Bulls look good there. But McLaren wasn't bad by any stretch there last year. Ferrari had the edge on them as well for a couple of years where it suited their car a bit. And now the Mercedes looks more balanced. So I think for all the top 4 will think that they can perform there. If anything, I think maybe there's a chance with McLaren that by trying to improve on last year's car that had such a strength in high-speed corners, that they maybe have just reduced that strength slightly. And Suzuka might be one where someone can get a little bit closer to them. It's certainly one where if your car is on edge, there's not a lot of room for error. I mean, China, there's not anyway, but if you run wide in some of the high-speed corners, you've got big runoff areas still, relatively. Whereas Suzuka, it's narrow and there's barriers waiting for you and there's grass and gravel. It's a great old-school circuit. It's one of the best we go to. But that does mean that if you're lacking just 0.5% of confidence in your car being a bit snappy or being tough to drive on the edge, like Lando Norris said the McLaren has been, then a qualifying lap might be one where you just leave that tiny bit more margin and that opens the door to someone. So I do wonder if we'll get a more competitive Suzuka, actually, than we had this weekend. And even this weekend, front row of the sprint, Hamilton and Verstappen, a Ferrari and a Red Bull. Front row of the Grand Prix, Piastri and Russell, and McLaren and Mercedes. Like the top 4, they fluctuated over 2 days. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. Something you pointed out, though, as well, Johnny, as you were throwing us to that link, was I thought I'll check the weather for Suzuka being early in the year. And as you say, maybe slightly earlier than we've had. And my phone app will only take me up the next 10 days. So Tuesday, when everyone arrives, kind of Tuesday or Wednesday.
And then the world ends.
In the area. Yeah, pretty much. We've got, first track running will be Friday. But Tuesday, the high is currently, I've got UK settings on here. So 14 degrees and a chance of rain. So if I switch that very quickly to Fahrenheit to get a much better read on that for everyone, we're talking 56. It's going to be potentially wet, potentially cold. Again, totally different conditions. And that could have a major impact as well. So I'm excited by how competitive it is in terms of so many things can make a big difference in who's going to be strong and who's going to be not, that even just the temperature change from one day to another could see any one of the top 4 teams look potentially race-winning material or going to be trundling around in 7th and 8th.
Yeah, and qualifying alone for these first 2 Grand Prix has been ridiculous in terms of the delta between the top 10 at times. I mean, it was something like the top 6 were like 0.2 off each other in this qualifying thing. So, you said it, Bob, the qualifying can really make the difference as to how your race weekend goes, simply because you're either chasing it or you've got free air. And but there's nothing, it's hard to define. It's minuscule, the difference between them. But it could be the difference between starting 1st or 6th.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, no question. It's going to be interesting. And like you say, we could have a little bit more colder weather in Japan, but then we do Bahrain and Saudi Arabia back to back before we head sunny old stateside for Miami in May. So, and then we start the European season. Go ahead.
Cold and wet Bahrain, based on what we saw in preseason testing.
There you go. It could happen.
Yeah, I'd hope that would be warmer. I will admit it's going to be a challenge. I've planned my travel well for that triple header, that I actually make it home for about 36 hours between Japan and Bahrain. Because if you're trying to pack for cold and wet Japan, and then you were going to the Middle East and it was as hot as it should be, then that's going to be, you need a couple of suitcases for that. Whereas at least I can make my call when I get home. But yeah, you're right. It was very different conditions for testing, which actually bodes well for the race. That I would not expect to see a repeat of those, but it means we don't have a clear picture either of how teams will perform in race trim in Bahrain.
That's
because
true.
testing was so different for them. So
right.
The fluctuations are going to be week on week, and that's what's going to make this season so exciting. And as we've alluded
that's part of the fun.
Yeah, the gaps in the
Hey
championship
guys,
are just so small.
Before we leave the air, I'd like to take a moment to remember Eddie Jordan.
Yes, please do.
Whom we lost this week. I mean, one of the great personalities, maybe the last of the great personalities in Formula One, a racer to his core, built up his own Formula One operation from scratch after years in the junior series, had no money to work with, worked some miraculous sponsorship deals. He was cut from the Bernie Ecclestone mode. He was as good as his word, but you wanted to count your fingers after you shook his hand. And I'll never forget, 1991, David Hobbs and I were at Monza for the Grand Prix. This was right after the Belgian Grand Prix, at which Eddie debuted a new driver with a little help from Mercedes, and that was their young endurance star, Michael Schumacher, who, of course, qualified 7th, turned every head in the joint, and then was spirited away by Flavio Briatore to the Benetton team. So David and I are sitting at the Tyrrell Hospitality motorhome, having a cup of tea. Eddie Jordan comes by. David starts to give him some grief about pretty hot driver you had pulled right out from under you by the Benetton boys. And Eddie looked around and said, David, I can always find another driver. And that's the only time I can remember Eddie Jordan coming up on the short end of a situation like that.
Yeah, no question.
What a story it would have been for him if he could have held on to Michael for longer and then use that.
Just
because
imagine.
that was one of the big things, wasn't it? Is he gave great drivers chances and then essentially profited on them moving up to bigger teams.
Yeah, selling them on.
That would have been huge for him. But yeah, he was a great character in and around the paddock. Sadly, not seen anywhere near as much in recent years. But you knew when Eddie Jordan was in the place, and there wasn't a single team or team boss or driver that was immune to his kind of infectious personality or ever going to escape his wrath if he wanted to criticize and complain. Like, as a media pundit, he was brilliant in that sense. He never held back, but he was generally spot on with the way he approached things as well. He was one of a kind.
Yeah, no question about it. I absolutely agree with everything you just said. He was one of a kind, and sadly, Formula One doesn't have those kind of characters. By the way, Driving Ambition, 1999. It's on YouTube, the season with Eddie Jordan in 1998. Well worth a watch. So go on YouTube. It doesn't cost you anything, and learn a little bit about Eddie Jordan. But that's it for today's show. My thanks, as always, to Chris Medland and to Bob Varsha. We will be back for the Japanese Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time. So they do have a little bit of time to get some work done, get those cars up to speed, and learn a little bit more about the 2025 season. That's it, though, for the Chinese Grand Prix. Until next time, join us for the Japanese Grand Prix next time out. Bye-bye.